Shabbat Shalom. Can you come back every week? I love having the participation. It's amazing. It's nice not having to remind people it's okay to sing, it's okay to answer. It's good, it's good. But that means I get to throw you a question, and I will expect an answer. For those of you at least that have good vision, we see this word over and over and over and over throughout the first readings that we were doing today. Tet, Vav, Vet, if you are unable to see it from where you're sitting. Tov, 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 which means good. After every day we get the appellation, it's good, it's good, it's good. Except for the very last day when we get Tov Me'od, it's very good. And then in chapter 2, which we didn't read publicly together, but of course you were supposed to be reading that along by yourself during the week, pop quiz. We get a different combination. We get the phrase lo tov. No good. No good, right? This is Hebrew 101. Tov is good, lo tov is no good. But that's a little confusing because the context of the lo tov, the context of the no goodness, is when God is looking at Adam and saying it is not good for Adam to be alone. It is not good. But I am sure that, I believe it was Rochelle that read in in day number 6, that he wasn't alone. That we had Zechar u'Nekeva, we had male and female made. So how in chapter 2 can Adam be alone? And how can everything that culminated in the Tov Me'od, the very goodness of the 6 days of creation, suddenly a chapter later have a flaw, have a lo tov that is embedded into it, especially about something that seems to have already been covered in chapter 1? Well, first of all, we have to untangle our misconceptions. Most of us who maybe cut our teeth reading Harry Potter as the height of literature think of literature as being very linear. There was a chapter 1, there was a chapter 2, and there's a chapter 3, and unless the author goes out of their way to say we're having a flashback sequence, that it's pretty much 1 minute after the other in the order that the words are put down on the page. Well, that's a very modern convention. And that is one that is not shared by the Torah or indeed the rest of the Tanakh, the rest of the Bible as well. There are multiple episodes where it's very apparent, more so even than this particular case, that what happens is you get chapter headings, and then you get fill in information in the next paragraphs or indeed in the next chapter as well. So the description that we find in chapter 1 of all of the days of creation is sort of the PowerPoint list of this is the kind of stuff going on during the flow of creation. And then when we get into chapter 2, we actually go in depth, slow down the flow of time, pull back the curtain, and say, yeah, but what was really happening during these moments of creation? Because everything that happens up until, I believe, chapter 4, if my memory serves me correctly, is still actually there in day number 6. We have to go quite a few chapters before we move past day number 6 and 7. So what is actually going on with this notion of Tov and Lo Tov regarding Adam? Well, first of all, who is Adam? Adam. Wrong. It is only later that Adam becomes a personal name for an individual. In chapter 1, in day number 6, Adam is not his name, because it's not Adam the dude. This is Adam, the creature from Adamah, the creature from the earth, the creature drawn from the soil of the ground. And this creature is not just one person in any way, shape, or form. Now, how do we know that? Well, if you'll pardon the modern parlance, because the pronouns are confusing. I know a lot of people get very upset about that whole use of the word pronoun, but I have to tell you from the beginning, there are pronouns in the Torah. and they are there to confuse you as well as to illuminate you. And let's talk about the confusion. The confusion is, during day number 6, during the flow of creation, we get 2 different pronouns for Adam. We get perhaps what you would be expecting, that Adam is referred to through the direct object pronoun oto. That bara oto, God created, any Hebrew majors in here? Him. That God created him. Oto is the direct object pronoun meaning him. But 2 words later, we get that God created otam, which means them. The direct pronoun plural for third person. Sorry, English teacher coming back to me. So we have the third person singular masculine, and we have the third person plural, which is indefinite because it can be masculine or it can be mixed, as Hebrew is a little different than English if you weren't aware already. Slightly. So what in the world is going on that would make God change from a verb, or a pronoun that is a singular third person masculine, or at least masculine by default, for indeed we can call other objects that in English we would call it, also by that same oto, that same pronoun, and 2 words later using the same verb of creation to talk about otam, to talk about them. Well, that's where we go back and we unpack a little bit of chapter 2. What is the most famous explanation for the creation of Chava, also known as Eve? What is the most famous explanation for the creation of Eve? The one that people love to do in all the animated TV specials with the very carefully placed foliage and cuddly animals to make sure that we don't see them being naked. A rib, right? It's not just what's for dinner, it's what you're made of. A rib. Well, actually, it doesn't say rib. The same way it doesn't say apple, I know. Boom, brain blown. It also doesn't say rib. It says it's a selah. Now, yes, I know those of you who know modern Hebrew are going to say, but Rabbi, in modern Hebrew that means rib. Yes, modern Hebrew is derived from the interpretations and application of biblical Hebrew and has been codified into particular forms and manifestations which do not necessarily reflect the ancient form of the language. That's what happens with language, right? The same way that in the Middle Ages, or rather later, in Shakespearean time, I could call something artificial, and what I would be saying is it is full of artifice, that it has been skillfully crafted, not that it is somehow in opposition to the word natural. Language changes. And this word, selah, really, which is also codified in modern Hebrew, for those of you that are math majors, can mean the side, or the edge, like in a geometric shape. The edge of something, the side. You know, how many sides does a square have kind of thing? This is the word you're using. So what is going on here is there seems to be an understanding that is put in much more detail throughout the Midrash, that what God first created, that we call Adam, wasn't Adam the dude. It was actually a composite creature, a creature that could find no companionship with any of the other creatures of the world. I mean, sure, Adam could name them, and Adam could recognize in them their qualities and their beauty, and indeed, we all love our animals too, but could not find his equal, or could not find their equal, depending upon how you wish to reflect this stage of our creation. And so what does God do? God pushes Adam into an anesthetic sleep, and then divides Adam. One side then becomes what we would now know as Adam, and the other side then becomes what we would now know as Eve. But both of them began as a singular creature. Indeed, some of the commentators go on to use the parlance of their generation, although we don't use this anymore, of Siamese twins, conjoined twins. That indeed Adam had shnei panim, had 2 faces when first created, and then was separated into 2 separate beings, each with only 1 face, and then could find that helpmate. Egdo, could be with someone that would be their helper, that would truly be their equal and their partner. Something that no other creature on earth was seemingly able to match. Slightly more nuanced than God made Adam fall asleep, took a rib, and then somehow spun magic around it to make a woman. To recognize that the female was part of the male was part of the female from the creation of the soil, and then was merely separated into two entities so that they could be together, rather than being alone just with itself, is a much more profound notion. And by the way, please, I want to make sure nobody repeats that old myth: men have the same number of ribs as women. I swear to God, for thousands of years, people kept perpetuating the idea, not so much in the Jewish world, but still, that men had fewer ribs because God took one to make Eve. If you count your own ribs, you'll know it's not true. But people accept things as being true without doing any kind of investigation of their own, even if it just means poking themselves in the side. Now why? Why would God go through this rigmarole? Why not just make Adam and Chava separate? I mean, it's not like God went, oh no, I've made a singular human creature and it's lonely. Let me just split this in half and fix my mistake. God is not like us. God doesn't just do a face palm and fix things, because God knew what was happening. But imagine, if you will, if God truly had made Adam first, truly had made Adam the dude, and then decided that Adam the dude needed a woman to go along with him. And thus Eve would be taken not in that original act of creation, not in that original act of having breath blown into the nostrils, not in that original act of being shaped B'Tselem Elohim in the image of God, but Eve would be the afterthought. And Eve would be made secondarily, made from leftover spare parts, if you will, from Adam. Do we begin to see the difference that makes? Can you imagine that someone might, and indeed, unfortunately, many people have, say, therefore, women are secondary to men. Man was created first, women was created secondary. When God gave sovereignty over the world to man, he meant min, the dudes, not man, Adam, humanity. And indeed, this is the argument that has been made because people couldn't understand how to read chapter 1 and chapter 2. Or more pointedly, people didn't want to understand how to read chapter 1 and chapter 2. People wanted a justification for feeling superior to all others, including women. For indeed, this same basic idea in Judaism is told to us as a lesson that we should not feel superior to anyone. I know with all of that Or LaGoyim stuff that I was talking about, you may think that Jews feel ourselves superior to others, and yet it is in our texts that we say, why did God create Adam Rishon as a singular entity from which to bring all of humanity forth, so that none would be able to say, my ancestors are superior to yours. None. Not Jewish or non-Jewish, not one family versus another, not one nation versus another, not one race versus another. All are from Adam Rishon, and that includes all genders. All are derived from that same creative act. All are made B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, for it has nothing to do with the shape of our body, with our chromosomes, or with the color of our skin, or the nation that we call home. It has to do with the spirit within us that God gave equally in full measure to all of us. And indeed, when the Torah says that God blesses this Adam, there in chapter 1, it very pointedly says, Vayivarech otam, and God blessed them. That unified, multifaceted being that would go on to be the root of diversity throughout our world and throughout our lives. How great, says the Talmud, is the creation of God. For all other creators, all human kings, when they stamp a coin using a die, using a mold, a shape, a form, all the coins are basically identical. And yet when God creates a new person, a new generation, each one is different from those that came before. Children are not clones of their parents. It's okay, Trip, you can be separate. Children are not even blending of their parents. Yes, there is admixture, but then there is uniqueness in each and every one of us. And that is coded in the very first chapter and chapter 2. If you look for it, if you look for misogyny, if you look for racism, if you look for division, if you look for feelings of superiority, you won't find them unless you bring them there yourself. But if you look at what God has tried to teach us beyond just a short summary of a few of the highlights of God's creation, if you look at the interplay of the language, at the depth of what God is reflecting into our life, then you will find the blessings that God has tried to give otam, to them, to everyone, to all of us. Do not be stingy with those blessings. Share them widely. Shabbat Shalom.